Welcome to another edition of Grace Under Pressure, where my guest today is Dean Miles. Grace Under Pressure is the show that deals with what's too often called the soft stuff. You know, the caring, the commitment, the compassion we show one another. But when you do it as a leader, as you will discover that Dean very much is, you do it to bring people together for common cause and common purpose. And you energize the organization with your abilities and your capacities and all the good stuff. Dean Miles, welcome to Grace Under Pressure.
Thank you so much, John. Love to be here.
Great. I want to tell folks all about you. Dean is the founder and president of Bridgepoint Consulting and Strategy Group. It's a global coaching firm. He spent his career coaching executives to lead themselves in better organizations. He, like me, is a member of Marshall Goldsmith 100 Coaches. He's on the Forbes Executive Coaches Board and the Center for Creative Leadership. Dean has a master at understanding the needs of organizations and matching them with individuals. Dean is the kind of person that can look in an organization and make connections where others may not see it, which makes him invaluable to his clients. He's had extensive experience in the energy sector, as well as aerospace, financial services, healthcare, you name it. There's probably something he hasn't worked in. And he has a very intriguing background, which I'll tell you all about momentarily. Dean, welcome to Grace Under Pressure. So,
thanks, John. It's a pleasure.
Now, as you know, because you and I have had these conversations, so you come to our world of coaching and strategy from a very different background. So different, you are actually invisible, or what we would call undercover. So tell us a little bit about what you can about that experience, Dean.
Yeah, John, it was certainly not on my radar. I was 2 weeks from starting law school when had this moment of, what am I doing? Like, how did I get in this future career path? When I got a lead that there was a company in Ohio, won't be more specific than that. They're one of two companies in the US that contracts out undercover agents to local, state, and federal agencies, including the DEA. And so the mindset there is for agencies that do this, if you go undercover, you're undercover for a while. And so if they find an offshoot that they want to investigate, they don't want to use up one of their own agents. So I'm a temporary undercover agent. So they bring me in, yeah. So 3 to 6 months, I go deep and follow it as far as I can follow it. And then the SWAT team comes in and takes me out with everyone else. So that's what I did.
Not with everyone. And I hope they take you out differently than that.
No. I would get bruised up like everyone else. But I'll tell you this, John, the training that I received set me on a path for both, and we'll get to this later, but some careers that I've had that then take me all the way to coaching. And it was on the instinct. And so the DEA trainers that I had, they differentiated trusting your instinct versus obeying your instinct. And here's the story they would tell, John. Imagine there was a high wire act, right? A guy's walking across this rope over Niagara Falls, and he's got a wheelbarrow, and he says to the crowd, do you trust that I could put someone in this and take them across safely? And the crowd's, yay, it would be amazing. Then he says, who wants to go? That's way different, right? Obeying, there's an action there. And so when you're all alone, really in harm's way intentionally, you can't just trust your instinct. You have to obey it. Now I see how leaders do that. I see how great coaches do that.
Oh, what a wonderful, I mean, we've had many guests on the show, many of whom are coaches, and you're the only one with an undercover background. So you've sketched us the behavioral aspect of it. What did you learn about human behavior by dealing with the different side of life, shall we say? So.
Yeah, and what's interesting, John, is that most of my work was within white collar. Was within management, within large hospital systems. Here's what I found about human behavior. Quite often, a good person who made one bad decision that sent them on a path, right? Not all of these individuals are evil, wicked people. Good people made a bad decision that made it very difficult for them to deviate from that. That's one thing I learned. And then
So,
second, go ahead. Yes.
bad decision. Did they embezzle or, get involved with drugs or something, or what was the?
Yes, I mean it often a friend tends, a work friend invited them into a space. So either they were in debt and found a shortcut to get some extra money,
Yeah.
or under a lot of stress, overwhelmed, and needed that competitive edge. And so to snort something, to smoke something, to inject something for what they thought would be a greater good. But this is highly, highly addictive stuff. And these are really smart people that run these drug organizations where they make it affordable, they make it available, and it makes you feel really, really good.
Well, I'm glad you're mentioning this, not the drug aspect of it, which is a whole nother issue in itself, but the idea that we are frail human beings, and
Indeed.
one step here or there might set us on a bad career path, and which means from a management or leadership standpoint, all of us are vulnerable. And never assume that everyone in the organization is honest as you are, or maintain your own integrity. You are not as good as you may think you are. Did you observe that kind of thing, Dean? So
I really did. So John, a friend of ours, Mitchell Levy, talks about credibility. And I like what Mitchell talks about there as he differentiates between internal credibility and external credibility. And you think about politicians, externally, very credible. Internally, they're lying on their taxes, they've cheated on their spouse, right? You start to see that. I think as leaders, as managers, as coaches, we're looking for that alignment of those two, internal and external credibility. And the only way you can really see that is over time. But we are frail and we do make mistakes. And I have just learned the power, and I've been the recipient of it as well, John, of a second chance. Right? There are some things that you don't get a second chance. I think there are some things you cross a line, abuse and et cetera. There must be consequences.
Yeah.
But embedded in that space, there needs to be room for a second chance.
Oh, I wholly believe in that. I think we're all beneficiaries of second chances, maybe multiple second chances throughout our lives. You hit on a good thing though about I have a phrase in my newest book was Grace Notes, Leading in an Upside Down World. And I know you, I think, are akin to this because I would say the world you were in purposely was an upside down world. But knowing what experience you gained in that world, you have a phrase you call ready or not. How does that apply to us today, Dean? So,
yeah, it's another maybe a way of saying VUCA. I think a lot of us have become more familiar with that here in 2020. So VUCA is an acronym for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And it almost is used like as a frustrated curse word, like VUCA. Like, I can't believe it got us again. Yeah. Another way of saying VUCA is, how do you prepare yourself and your team and your organization to be ready or not? It's coming. The pandemic came. This great resignation, ready or not, right? Here it is. Supply chain issues, ready or not, here it comes. And that phrase for me came from that game. I know that we all played it at some point in our earlier years of hide and seek. And I've done some research on this. Every culture that I could find has their version of the game. And every culture, once they establish the rules, does the same thing. We count down from 10 or whatever the number is, and everyone's scurrying around hiding. And then we yell out, ready or not, here I come. Which is an odd thing to say, this ready or not. Like, is that being rude? Is that being confident? I'm not sure where that's coming from. There's things that we can do within the organization to have that mindset, to the high probability of a low probability event. Yes, I'm just finding it's just high probability of a high probability. You need to be ready or not. The other aspect of this, John, is from a leader to say back to their team, hey, ready or not, I'm bringing my integrity. Ready or not, I'm bringing my integrity. Ready or not, I'm bringing my values. Ready or not, I'm bringing my love for you, right? As people on my team. Ready or not, I'm bringing it.
That's such a powerful thought, because everyone's heard this saying, we don't control events, we only control how we react to them. And your last point about, I will bring my integrity, I will bring my love, I will deal with it the best way I know how. So after leaving your world of undercover, you went corporate. So what parallels or not did you see there, and how has that led you to where you are now? So
yeah, what I like to say is, I was in the drug world. We had our first son, and then that starts to change things, right? To be gone 3 to 6 months at a time, and that's not the dad I wanted to be. So I had to make a big shift. But I knew drugs, so I went from drugs to drugs, John. So I went from illegal to legal. I became a pill pusher, and so got a job with Pfizer Pharmaceuticals, and that turned into a long career with Merck Pharmaceuticals. And here's what I found with these physicians as our customers, but also just with the teams that I would lead. It always came down to trusting your instinct, obeying your instinct, assuming the best, believing in people. And my time at Merck, John, we had so much money to spend on development. I mean, really obscene amount of money. And here's what I found is that it wasn't sustainable. We would bring in the greatest whatever, we would get a bump on our numbers, and then over time it would trail back down.
Don't tell people that. I'm going to edit this out of there, because
I'm going to bring what you and I both know that works. And then you have to bring in the next thing, and numbers get better and they trail back down.
Okay.
Then I read this quote: we need to be reminded more than we're instructed. We need to be reminded more than we're instructed. And it was the follow-up that was missing. And coaching is such a great vehicle for reminding, right? It's that continuity, it's that showing back up with, what did you say you were going to do, and now what are you doing? That's what I ended up doing at Merck when I was coaching and didn't know that that's what it was, John. Then thought, you know what? I think I'm going to leave pharmaceuticals and start coaching full time. Mentioned to my wife, hey, what do you think if I left Merck? Dean, you need to do this. I was like, baby, you answered that question way too fast. Like, this could be horrific. And she's like, what's the worst that could happen? We'll lose everything. It's fine. We're smart. We'll start over. My grandparents were upset. My parents cried. You're going to ruin your career. But I knew that coaching was needed within corporate environments. Everything was going so fast, and they needed clarity. They need to be reminded, and we could do better with it for sure.
Well, that's great. I love the passion you do that, and you've got to be the only person I know that it seems like your family was okay with you being an undercover agent, but coaching, oh no, you're throwing your life away. That's a good one.
Yeah, I haven't thought of that perspective, but yeah, you're exactly right.
That's a good story. So, but your coaching practice, you have woven in Bridgepoint coaching and strategy. So what's the nexus between the two, Dean? So
you probably have heard a similar statistic, John, that 70% of strategic failures is not a failure of strategy. It was the failure of the execution. Found the same thing. So you've heard this term CSI, crime scene investigators. Mm-hmm. We at Bridgepoint like to think that we are coaching strategic investigators. And so we are willing to go in where no one else wants to go find what in the world is working and what in the world is not. So strategy is easy. I really find it's easy. Mm-hmm. That planning process, it tends to be obvious where you should go. The hard part is taking those words in that strategic plan and now making those into day-to-day actions, things that you're doing all day, every day, for a long time. Coaching and strategy, man, it's like peanut butter and jelly, right? Biscuits and gravy, mac and cheese. Those are just things that just are delicious together. Coaching and strategy go hand in hand.
Well, there's you made the link there. The strategic is the big picture, and the coaching then becomes the execution or the day to day. And what often happens, and you know this very well, is what happens at the top doesn't get filtered down to the bottom, or by the time it does, it's irrelevant. And that's why change initiatives are so difficult. Do you have a perspective on that, Dean? So
I do, yeah. And we kind of take that undercover kind of mindset there. So a very popular show, Undercover Boss, right? You may have seen that. Many of you, those that are watching right now, may have watched that. And how many times does the show plot line start with, they're in the C-suite, the CEO president makes a policy change or a strategic change, and then puts on the wig, puts on the mustache, goes to the front line, and it's nothing like they intended. Right. Our model is that we have to start at the top, but we want to go as far down the organization that they will allow us. We want to be embedded in the organization. So our minimum is we are on site on 5 consecutive days or a week, a month, for a minimum of 2 years. If you think about, if you interview one person after, this is morbid, but after an accident, you get one perspective. But if you can interview and spend time with everybody, that becomes a game changer. And that's what we're able to do over those 2 years and over those 5 days. Really, really deep discovery of where is here. The next phase is let's discover, or let's develop what's next. And now we have to go into the design phase.
Great. That's a very, very powerful model. And that's what I wanted to talk to you about. And when the coach essentially is embedded in the organization, he or she becomes actually part of that organization and becomes ideally becomes a trusted advisor with an outside perspective. So it's more involved, it's advisory as well as coaching. And do you find that that example, Dean? So
yeah, very often, John. I would say most of our engagements, how they start within 60 days, that's no longer the direction we were heading in, because the president or the person who kind of invited us in had an idea of what they thought the opportunity was. There was just the PR version of what we talk about at this organization. And once we start lingering and asking those questions of those that are actually doing the work, there's just a huge disconnect. And my business partner was just telling me yesterday, this is a manufacturing facility, and he asked the plant manager, how well do you think you and your team handles conflict? A scale to 1 to 10. And he's like, oh, for sure, we're a solid 7. Then went to the team members. The average score was a 2. And we see that almost all the time. And there's things that we can't talk about.
And this kind of dichotomy happens all the time. So I want to drill down on that. So obviously that more senior, the plant manager, is not an idiot. Right. He or she has accomplishments. What accounted for their utter lack of awareness of what's really going on?
Great question. Most of the time we find that it just doesn't feel safe to tell that individual. I have dozens of stories where they will say, have an open door policy. You can tell me whatever. And one person tries it and it goes horribly wrong. And the message is now sent. We don't do that anymore. What coaching helps makes visible is these 5 C's. What needs to be clarified? What needs to be confirmed? What needs to be communicated? Who or what needs to be connected? And what will be the consequences? And it's through that we start having conversations that typically weren't had. So with the information that plant manager was getting, his assessment was right. He was asking questions. And when he would ask those team members, scale to 1 to 10, how are we doing? Oh yeah, we're 7, John, for sure. But it was when they were talking to the coach, oh my gosh, yeah, we're a 2.
So was there reluctance then, or even fear, to say a 2 rather than a 7? Is that what you?
Oh yeah. There's no doubt about that.
And that, you raised something too, because I think a lot of, and our colleague Tasha Urich talks about this, about how lack of self-awareness, and this touches into this. I think I'm doing okay, and I'm fine, and I'm reaching out to my managers, and I'm sure this individual is not malintended by any means, but simply blind to his or her behaviors and how they're affecting others. Is that the kind of thing that you see, Dean?
I do, John. And I think, unfortunately, if you've been in management the last 20, 30 years, you have taken assessments, you've had 360s done on you, you know what color you are, what animal you are, you know what your four letters in the alphabet. You've been so diagnosed, but here's what everyone on the team knows. Whatever change you're about to go initiate, you don't sustain it. And that's the unfortunate part. And John, you and I have talked in the different groups that we get to play with of why do we not do what we say? Why do we not do what we said we were going to do? And the organization remembers, the team members remember, we've been here before. You said you were going to stop doing that. But when the pressure comes and the deadlines come and the budgets are stretched, they go back to these bad habits.
And that's the challenging part, because all of us, I don't care how much coaching you have, we revert to type. The challenge is that how do I modulate that? How do I moderate that? And is that something that you guys deal with in the coaching that you offer? So,
yeah, we try to make those check-in points more frequent. I mean, the longer the gap is, you've heard the analogy of if you're traveling 100 miles and you get 1 degree off in the ocean, you are going to miss the mark by hundreds of miles, possibly. It's the same thing. So we're trying to get this all the way down to just micro moments, micro high focus moments. Another stat, John, most of us come to any given moment and we bring 70% of our ability. Right? Our best effort is typically not our first effort. That becomes a problem. So you and I, the leaders that we coach, the leaders that I've worked for in the past, could show up and wing it. And they're really good. They're good enough. What happens, and so DuPont has researched this, and they call it discretionary effort. What happens when you bring discretionary effort to the right behavior, to the right moment? 2 stories there. I coach an archer on the U.S. Olympic team. There are many things that person, just by raw talent, can bring 70% of their potential to, but where they must bring their best effort is in the setup. So it goes like this. They have to be straight. They have to align the string. They have to aim small, and they have to shoot strong. And each one of those elements, it must be 100%. But you can't bring your best effort to everything all day. It's just not sustainable. So it's finding what's that one thing that they can be consistent on bringing their best effort to. And then there needs to be a scoring system. So our friend Marshall Goldsmith does that. His research is around those daily questions of just, did I do my best? Yeah. That really becomes a game changer. And there's also the 4 disciplines of execution, that book 4DX. And just that compelling scorecard to make those behaviors visible in a smaller time period. It tends to help.
There's an old saying, it's you measure what you treasure. And we always apply that as an organizational or not a diagnostic, but to organizations, but it's for us too. What do we measure? What do we treasure? And do we hold ourselves accountable, or do we give ourselves some metrics for this? So that's very accessible. We have a question here that said, from your background and as you're seeing now, what do you think is there a number one challenge that you see business leaders facing right now, Dean?
5 just went into my head, but if I had to pick one,
no, they don't have to be.
What I'm seeing now, John, is a level of exhaustion that I've never seen before.
Yeah.
I mean, we like to joke that we were busy before, pre-pandemic, but I mean, it is just a flat out, feels like a one breath short of death. Nothing is going right. Kids are not doing well. Family's not doing well. The dog's not doing well. The parents aren't doing well. Right? I mean, this keeps getting piled on. The ability to recover. Pre-pandemic, most leaders had a good system and knew how to recover well. Whatever system you have had has been rubbed down to the nub, right? I mean, you've eked every little ounce you can get out of it. Now what do you do? And so I'm seeing this idea of sabbaticals coming up into the peer review type of research that I have access to. A 20-minute breathing exercise I'm not saying don't do it, but it seems not to cut it anymore. Having a long weekend doesn't cut it anymore. A lot of organizations are looking at their tenured or high talent individuals and say, I want you to take 6 months off, right? And compensated, I need you to go get back with that passion, get back with that purpose, and get back with performance. So it's a working sabbatical. I think we're going to have to do something drastic. It can't be little micro moments. I think and I don't have it figured out, John, but that's what I'm seeing companies consider. We need a hard break.
Excuse me. That model has been used in academics forever.
Yes.
But I'm glad to see it migrate to the corporate, particularly in this time of urgency when nothing seems to be working and, the pandemic persists. And I sense you articulated very well. It's a sense of weariness about us. And so taking time to recharge, and it gets to an important point, twofold, actually. So many executives, it's an outward thing. I'm pushing for my organization. So as you know, as a coach, when you talk to them, what are you doing for yourself? Well, I don't have time for myself. That's the subtext. But there's another part of that, which is, I'm so important, I can't let go. So it's two competing forces there. I'm really important, I'm necessary, or people need me, when actually neither is true. So it's a challenge. But the idea of the sabbatical is for a high potential person, it could be a very wise investment. So
yeah, so a quick story. Many of our clients are in the School of Medicine or the university or healthcare spaces. And there's a hero type of a response that they've had. It's just been necessary. Chester, and what's his business partner? Is it Adrian? And they have a book.
Chester Elton and Adrian Gostick. So
I just saw a podcast they were talking about when you're on the front line. I mean, the military do this, our first responders do this. They pull them off the front line, right? And they rotate them. But I find some leadership positions are so specialized, John, there isn't a second or third person that can come back up to the front. And so if you're not out there doing what you're supposed to be doing, there isn't anyone that can take your spot. Now, what do you do? Man, these are hard questions that don't have easy answers.
Well, what you need to do, and this is longitudinal, not short term, is redesign the job in such a way so one person is not indispensable. Basically, that's how our military and first responder system works. But it's easy to say from the outside. So you and I are racing through this conversation, and we could go for another hour, but we need to bring it to a close sooner than later. And I'm going to ask you a question about grace. So what's the story that you have, Dean?
Yeah, my working definition of grace, and I'm so glad that you asked this question because it makes me think, is just undeserved favor, right? Forgiveness. And so in my early career, so coming out of that undercover environment, that put me in environments that I had spent my whole life not getting involved in, and now I threw myself in it. And I'm a frail person and fallible, and so found myself, even though I was in pharmaceuticals now, still involved in some other aspects. Long story short, I was making decisions along the way to solve problems, to get ahead and success, but also just to avoid problems. And here's where I found myself, John. There was Dean at home, there was Dean at work, and there was Dean at church. And those were three completely different people. If you were to ask someone to describe me, they would all be describing someone different. Oil and gas. I did a lot of work in that industry, and I've asked these young guys out in these oil rigs, if your buddy described you and I had your mom describe you, Would they describe the same person, right? And often they wouldn't. So I did a lot of work finding that authenticity and just getting down to one Dean. But I had a lot of loose ends out there, and I knew I needed to let my wife know. I've been making some bad decisions. This was years ago. I need you to know that. I didn't know how that was going to go, John. I didn't know if she would divorce me, if she would leave me. So a lot of emotions, a lot of tears, and she gave me grace. She's like, I see the changes that you've made, and that's the type of man I want to spend the rest of my life with. So we've been married now for 30 years, but undeserved grace.
Oh, what a wonderful, yes, that's a wonderful definition of it. Grace is given to us with no strings attached. What a wonderful thing. Dean, how can people find you? So,
LinkedIn is an easy one. And then our website is Bridgepoint CSG for Coaching Strategy Group, bridgepointcsg.com.
We will put it in the notes. Dean, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. I know you are extremely busy, but thanks for sharing some time with us today. And with
Thank
that,
you so much, John.